This is a briefing today by groups planning to protest next week's inauguration in Washington, D.C. It's just under an hour.
Good morning. Welcome to the second press conference with respect to counter-inaugural events organized by the D.C. Resistance Media Collective. My name is Shahid Buttar. I'm a lawyer here in the District of Columbia, and I'm one among many spokespeople for the counter-inaugural. Before I introduce the speakers who will be addressing you today about the substance of the actions planned for this week moving into next around the inaugural to protest the inauguration of Bush's second term, I'd like just to remind folks about the themes that we heard about in our last press conference on December 21st. We heard then from Gail Murphy at Code Pink and Global Exchange about the Bush administration's various wars, including the war on civil rights and human rights, particularly in the context of reproductive choice. We heard also from Gail about the Bush administration's ongoing wars on the peoples of the world, specifically in Iraq. We also heard from Brian Anders at the Washington Peace Center, who addressed not only Iraq, but also Vietnam, and how regardless of whatever distinctions we might imagine in this country, to people in the two countries ravaged by the American military for unnecessary, illegitimate, ultimately counterproductive wars, there is no distinction. Brian also addressed the war on civil rights in the unique context of veterans, who are threatened first by illegal stop-loss orders, which conscript once willing volunteers, the inadequate equipment available to them while in service, the bans on images of their coffins and pictures of the injured who are wheeled into Walter Reed Medical Center in the dark of night to keep your cameras from observing their missing limbs. And finally, the inadequate public services available to them as veterans that will doom many of them to depression, alcoholism, and even homelessness. We heard from Basav Sen at the Mobilization for Global Justice about the Bush administration's wars not only on the global environment, but also the poor, both in the context of international free trade corporate agendas that deepen and exacerbate poverty around the world, and domestic services like schools and hospitals threatened by budget cuts imposed by inflated, bloated military spending and Bush's tax cuts for his wealthy supporters. We also heard from other speakers about Bush's war on democracy and civil rights. Next week, we'll witness a $40 million celebration of the first election in over 100 years to which members of both houses of Congress objected. An election pervaded by unprecedented vote suppression, intimidation, and disenfranchisement, as well as conflicts of interest that would be recognized as corruption in any other country. While Bush savors $40 million in caviar and champagne, and one would hope not the cocaine he favored during his draft-dodging youth, we, the progressive movement of America, will also be celebrating. We'll be celebrating a renewed commitment to defend the values that once made America great, the values of democracy, of civil rights, of human rights, of equality, of opportunity for all, of justice, and of human rights. The two cities that were attacked during 9/11 both soundly rejected this administration. Over 90% of voters in the District of Columbia opposed him. We proved at the Republican National Convention last August that Bush is unwelcome in New York City. Today we'll hear from 5 speakers about what they plan to do to show that George Bush is also unwelcome here in the District of Columbia. We'll start with Nancy Shia from Critical Mass.
I'll repeat my name, Nancy Shia, spelled S-H-I-A. I'm a D.C. resident and member of D.C. Statehood Green Party. And in case you didn't see the front page of yesterday's paper, the headline read, U.S. tells D.C. to pay inaugural expenses. This is reportedly unprecedented that the district pay inaugural expenses. We, the people of Washington, D.C., rejected Bush by 90%. Maybe this is our punishment. If the people living here didn't have any reason to protest before this, we certainly do now. I work in downtown Washington. I commute to work every day on my bicycle. I try to do critical mass once a month. I do critical mass because it's fun. It gives me a sense of freedom seldom felt in the corporate culture that we live in. I often do it with my granddaughter in the back seat on my bicycle. She also enjoys the rush of moving together in a spirited group with the wind at our faces. Critical mass started in San Francisco in 1992. Bicyclists just get together to ride. There are critical mass rides in 212 cities in North America, 141 cities in Europe, 20 in Australia, 22 in Asia, 8 in South America, and 1 in Africa. Critical mass is a time for people to get creative, not confrontational. At some critical masses, people have come together to ride naked. In one San Francisco ride, 2 men put together 2 recumbent bikes on a couch and rode the couch. In Washington, D.C., the critical mass ride is the first Friday of every month. We leave DuPont Circle between 6:15 and 6:30 and usually ride with 20 to 30 people. Sometimes D.C. is a lot smaller than that. The counter-inaugural critical mass ride is scheduled to start at Union Station at 7:30 in the morning. We'll take a few minutes to gather and orient riders from out of town, pass out the route, and ride out sometimes around 8 in the morning. The route has not been worked out yet, but we will definitely take into account which streets are being closed. I, for one, will not try to unblock the streets, and I will also encourage others to enjoy the ride in a peaceful, non-confrontational manner. There's been far-reaching response to this call for a counter-inaugural critical mass ride. People are coming to ride from Maine, Utah, Florida, Phoenix, Chicago, and San Diego, to name a few. We've been offered blue ponchos by a group called the Whoville Nation in Indiana. We've been offered blue bracelets from people who call themselves the Hope Bracelet. And we've been offered blue armbands from a group in New York City. At this rate, the counter-inaugural critical mass will be the best accessorized group of Inauguration Day. A second critical mass ride is scheduled to go on at 4 p.m. in the afternoon to accommodate out-of-towners who can't make it to the morning ride. We'll leave DuPont Circle a little after 4 and ride by the inaugural ball sites. Thanks.
We'll next be hearing from Jim McDonald at the DC Anti-War Network.
Good afternoon. We formed the DC Anti-War Network back in September 2001 as a response to the reaction of our government to the horrible tragedy of September 11th. We believe that Bush and the leaders of this country took us down 2 very disastrous paths simultaneously. First was the war in Afghanistan, followed by the subsequent war in Iraq. And secondly, the war here at home on our civil liberties, notably the Patriot Act and the detaining of even American citizens down in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Dawn formed originally as a protest both to the war in Afghanistan and to the Patriot Act, and we've been having actions in the District of Columbia ever since then to promote a world of peace and justice. Now January 20th is coming, and we still need to promote peace and justice. We need to speak out against U.S. militarization abroad and defend our civil liberties here at home. So the DC Anti-War Network has called for a series of actions on January 20th. Among them are a march and a rally, and we've also called for some civil disobedience, a die-in action to mourn all of the dead throughout the world and at home at the hands of the U.S. government. On January 20th at 9 a.m., Dawn is calling for people to congregate at DC's Malcolm X Park. It's officially known as Meridian Hill Park. That's at 16th and Euclid Streets Northwest, where we will have a rally from 9 to 11:15 a.m. Among the speakers that we will have include Father Gerard Jean Just, who is a freed Haitian political prisoner, Amy Goodman, from the host of Democracy Now!, Michael Ratner, an international human rights lawyer who's been working on the Guantanamo Bay case, Medea Benjamin, who is a co-founder of Code Pink and also with Global Exchange. And we also plan on having a Stan Goff from Military Families Speak Out, and Aiden Delgado, who is an Iraqi war veteran. We also will have several other speakers as well from a wide range of groups within the peace and social justice movement. We'll also have some performers, including among them David Rovix, who's a well-known folk singer. At 11:15, we'll then have a permitted rally, which will go down 16th Street towards the White House. It will go down and turn at I Street and end at McPherson Square. This march is open to all people and will be permitted, as I mentioned, and among the features of it, there will be 1,000 black draped coffins marching along it. Now, a half hour after the end of that march starts, that's when our civil disobedience action will begin. It will also leave from Malcolm X Park, and it will go down to the White House and end at H and 16th Street, which is Lafayette Park, right at the front doors of the White House. We've been assured by police that we should be able to get to that point, and there we will have a die-in. If you want a further rationale for why we are calling for this action, you can receive it from me. But basically, we believe that because, as Shahed has mentioned, the democratic system is not working, our freedom of expression has been violated repeatedly, and we believe that we need to do more to save these lives of people all over the world. There are a lot of other actions going on, and we hope that you support them all. But right now, we'll pass it along to the next speaker. Thank you.
We'll next hear from Sister Shahzad Nzinga from the National Alliance of Black Panthers.
Good afternoon. My name is Shahzad Nzinga. I am the National Chairwoman and founder of the National Alliance of Black Panthers. This is a multiracial organization with a mission of fighting racism, oppression, imperialism here in the United States and abroad. The November presidential election was to be our first decisive battleground in opposition to George W. Bush. Over 21 million young people came out to vote, as you know, and the black vote itself was raised to over 25%. Yet our vote, our voice, our input was marginalized again. We are now facing a right-wing future which has no sympathy for the concerns of black people or the poor of this country. In the coming 4 years, we're going to see many more battles rise up in this country as poor and black people fight to get their needs addressed by this coming administration. The next and most crucial battleground will be on January 20th, right here in Washington, D.C., as we oppose the inauguration of George W. Bush. On this day, the National Alliance of Black Panthers will unite with youth and people from communities from across the nation to march in the inauguration against Bush and his policies, his administration, and his efforts to turn back the clock on our civil rights. We are marching for many things. We are marching for the votes, for the rights for people to vote. We are marching for the 44% of black people who are incarcerated in the new slavery system called American prisons. We are marching for the 70% black illiterate people in this country. But most of all, we are marching for social justice for poor people, oppressed people, and the disenfranchised of this country. And on January 20th, we're calling for all Americans who oppose Bush and his anti-people policies to come forth and let your voice be heard. If you have never stood for anything in your life, January the 20th is the day to stand, opposing Bush and his anti-people policies, his occupation of Iraq, his occupation of Palestine, his occupation of Haiti. These things need to be opposed. And we can't sit by idly and let him come into the White House without any opposition from the people. And I come to you today not as a wealthy person. I am not a privileged person of this country. I am a poor, single working mother. And I am very proud to stand with the organizations on January 20th, like Dawn, who are coming out to oppose Bush and his policies and his war on Iraq, which are taking so many lives, not only in Iraq, but over here in the U.S. as well. If our millions of votes in the election couldn't establish us a vote or a concern, or get a concern from Bush, or even from the Republicans or the Democrats, then perhaps our thousands upon thousands of angry voices and angry faces will get our message across to Bush that there are dissatisfied people in this country. We're not going away. We're going to be here for the next 4 years, and we're going to oppose any of his policies that come against us, as to be expected. So we invite all to come out and take a stand. And we, the National Alliance of Black Panthers, unite with all progressive organizations and individuals to make this stand. But J20, you have to understand, is just the first day in opposition. This is going to be something that is ongoing, and I'm hoping with Dawn and with other groups on a continued basis, because we are in big trouble. Thank you.
Before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to invite, I see people standing along the walls and in the back. We have 3 open seats in the front and 1 in the second row, so please feel free to come forward and take those. Next, I would like to introduce Lila from the Anarchist Resistance.
Hi, my name is Lila Kay, and I'm an anarchist and activist with Anarchist Resistance here in DC. We are essentially not an organization, but a cluster comprised of individuals and groups of anarchists in this area. We came together to organize around events against the inauguration this year, and basically we're a group that is anti-authoritarian, non-hierarchical, anti-capitalist, and are striving in our everyday lives to build community through ideas of cooperation and decentralization. We are working on a variety of events, and those have been brought to the group by all sorts of individuals and smaller groups of anarchists that have been working together in a form of a network. Some of the events we've been planning are a march on the day of the 20th, which will be at Franklin Square at 12:30. It's going to be a large and vibrant, energetic march, hopefully with all sorts of banners and music and puppets. We are also planning a mass day of outreach on Monday the 17th, in which we'll go out into our communities and neighborhoods throughout DC to talk to people just about what's happening at the inauguration, why we're opposed to it, all of the sorts of issues that are being perpetuated by Bush, his administration, the government at large, as well as capitalism and the society that we are living in every day. We're also going to have, on the 21st, that Friday, a really, really free market, which is going to be a festive event in which there's going to be free food and music and art and people sharing their skills. Everything's going to be free, sort of explaining that the free market that we live in is actually a completely false free market in which everything is driven by profit and not in the interest of people or to give people what they need or what they're looking for. So that should be a really fun event that will be hopefully drawing people from all communities to come together and sort of put into a reality what we mean when we say anarchy. Basically, the reason that we've decided that this is going to be an important event to organize around is because we are opposed to all sorts of government forms of authority that are set in place to control and oppress people, that remain in place because they are profit-driven and because they feed off of the work that we and the people of all levels in this country do every day, and that they're simply in place to serve the rich and the people who are in positions of power. We also wanted to highlight the fact that the issues that exist both globally and here, the fact that, you know, the things in this country that need to be funded, like schools, like education, like libraries, healthcare for people, people getting a living wage, all of those things are being neglected while we're funding wars all over the world and the occupation of countries and exploiting people through free trade agreements throughout Latin America and throughout the world, really. We also want to highlight the fact that whether Kerry was elected or looking back through history at any of the presidents we've had, all of these policies have existed in some form or another, and they've all been sort of working towards the same goal and perpetuating capitalism and profit-driven goals, and that we just want to say that from this day forth we need to continue the struggle that we've been fighting, since people have been fighting throughout history, to sort of bring back the attention to the people and what the people's needs are, and that's only going to be accomplished in a way that people are working by self-determination, decentralized, in decentralized communities, and working cooperatively together. We also want to stand on that day in solidarity with the people of the world who are suffering from Bush's policies, as well as the U.S. government's policies, as well as the actions of corporations and the rich people in this country, showing them that what they see as the U.S. and the face of the U.S. as a perpetuator of war and genocide and exploitation is not what we represent, and that we are standing up in solidarity with those people on this day and every day forward from then. So hopefully we'll have a lot of other people throughout the community joining us on this day, and we'll be standing in solidarity as well with these other organizations in the streets on January 20th and onward. Thank you.
Our last speaker this morning, before we'll move into then a question and answer period, will be Sarah Kaufman from Turn Your Back on Bush.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kaufman, and I'm from Turn Your Back on Bush. I'm the field director. And so far in our work with Turn Your Back on Bush, we have mobilized 41 organizers across the country who are working in their communities, working in their states, working in their cities to get people to come to Turn Your Back on Bush. This is very much a grassroots type of organization, a grassroots movement. There are people coming from all walks of life to this event to come to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration to turn their backs on Bush. There are pastors coming, there are military families, there are servicemen, servicewomen, we have teachers, students, medical, healthcare assistants, etc. People that really are dedicated to serving their countries and really care about their place in the nation are all gathering and coming to Washington, D.C. for this event. The inauguration is a public event. It is something that is written into the Constitution as a way for all of the citizens of America to celebrate democracy. So we are going to use this event as a way for exactly that, for democracy, as a way for all of us to get together and make our message heard by turning our backs. It is an act of nonviolent, it's a nonviolent action, and we're all gathering as citizens. We're coming without signs, without pins, without placards. We're just ordinary people there to have our audience with the president and to show that we withdraw our support from the president, and that to use this parade is turning into it's full of a lot of pomp and circumstance. And we want to show in the midst of this that while there's this celebration going on, there are a great many people who are who feel that Bush has turned their back on them, that he's turned their back on the environment, he's turned their back on what is going on internationally, what's going on in Iraq right now, that he has turned their back on the economy, on students, on schools, on education. So they want to show that he's not going to get away with this. We also, as we're turning our back on the president, we're also turning towards each other. This is an act where we are all gathering together and uniting all along the parade route and uniting in an action, in a simple gesture, in a very powerful and symbolic gesture. And we're turning towards each other for support. We're turning towards each other so that we can continue to fight these policies that are being put in place by this administration. And that is, we're trying to encourage people to gather early so that they can get a spot along the sidewalk at 9 a.m. And it's going to be all along the parade route, and it's going to be, quite a visual spectacle as Bush's motorcade passes. There are going to be citizens from across the country that are gathering with their backs turned to the president.
We'll now invite questions from the press. Ma'am.
Two things. One, can you talk about the scope, the number of protesters you're expecting to bring, particularly in light of what happened in New York? And part two, from your discussions with law enforcement, do you have any sense whether you're going to draw some of the same activities that you saw in New York when you do critical mass, when you're talking about die-ins? There were mass arrests in New York. Are you expecting similar things here?
Maybe we'll start. Well, maybe we can have a few speakers address each question, but we'll start with Jim from the Anti-War Network.
Hi, on the question of numbers, as you can see, there's so many different actions going on at the same time. This isn't being organized in your classic mass mobilization. Go to the rally, find out what's happening, see how many people were there. To figure out the real story of numbers, you're going to have to go to multiple actions all over the city, sometimes going on at the same time. For our action, we estimate that we'll be in the several thousands at a minimum, but we don't know ultimately. A lot of these decisions get made at the last second. But I really would like people, instead of focusing on numbers, because you're not going to get the story, you're not going to find that crowd shot. What you're going to find are lots of crowd shots, and to appreciate what's happening in our movement. We are moving away from a sort of organizing where we just have a grand organization which plans grand events. We're having lots of organizations because we believe that one of the problems in this country is that it's not responsive to the people. And so we must begin as grassroots organizers from the ground up. And that's what a group like Dawn is. This will be the biggest event by far that we have ever put together. It'll probably be the biggest. Turn Your Back on Bush didn't even exist, before the election. I mean, that's what's exciting, and that's a story I think that you all should be telling. As far as police arrests, we don't know. That's ultimately a decision for the police. They changed their tactics. We're coming in a spirit of nonviolence to express ourselves against the war, against oppression, and if we can do that, we'll be happy.
Before we move on to other questions, we'll just take a few more speakers. Nancy from Critical Mass.
Yeah, I was just going to say that City Council recently passed a law prohibiting the police to preemptively arrest. We're hoping that the police will obey the law. We intend to cooperate with the police. If the police have any questions for us, there's a phone number and an email address on the website under the Critical Mass organization. The police are free to call us, and we'll cooperate with the police. We don't expect any confrontation with the police. And as far as numbers, we're hoping that this will be the largest critical mass that Washington's ever had, and the goal is 1,000, but we could have, San Francisco's had 12,000, Chicago's had 5,000, so it's hard to say how many we will have. It will be 7:30 in the morning, though, so that may affect.
Before I take another question, if I may just address the last one as well. It's important to remember that the people that will be out for the counter-inaugural are not criminals, they are patriots. They are people committed to defending the values that made this country great at one point before this president came and undermined that legacy. Second, with respect to turnout, I would just invite everyone to consider the scope of the resistance, not only here in D.C., but also in other places. There will be people acting around the country, around the planet, in fact, against this illegitimate, corrupt president. Finally, last spring, there were 1.2 million people who marched for women's choice alone. Add to that people from the environmental movement, the labor movement, student groups, and faith groups, and you have the makings of a bona fide, nonviolent popular uprising. Next question. Sir.
Ms. Nzenga and Lila were very non-specific about what you have planned for the inauguration. I wonder if each of you could talk specifically about what you're doing. And Lila, if you could spell your name for us, because we don't have it. I'd appreciate that.
Also, I'm just going to ask press people to identify themselves.
My name is Mike Janofsky. I'm with the New York Times.
Thank you. Sister Shahzad?
The National Alliance of Black Panthers, what we've been doing is getting together youth, especially in the D.C. community, who we feel have been very disenfranchised by even the inauguration, which, you know, the government wants D.C. to foot the bill. We have been getting together the youth, and we're planning to bring them out, and we are just joining in the actions with Don at Malcolm X Park. And the reason we are going to Malcolm X Park, not necessarily for the organizations, but because of the history of that park. That was the place where most of the revolutionaries during the counter-revolution in this country met, such people as Kwame Ture and the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. That was where they had their great global gatherings for people who wanted liberation. And there is a great spirit in that park. So we go there with the youth and with other people from the community. We also have Panthers coming in from our chapters in New Orleans, North Carolina, New Jersey, to share in this day. And we're going to march down 16th Street with the rest of the protesters, and we're going to protest Bush. That is basically what we are doing that day. We have no specific action. Mm-hmm.
Lila?
It's Lila, Lila, Kkaye. I actually did say the events we are going to be having, but I can repeat them for you.
Maybe I misunderstood, but I was curious to know specifically what you are going to do on the 20th.
Me, myself?
Well, your group, whoever you represent.
Okay, well, yeah, the events that myself and other people in our group have planned are, one, the march that's going to be happening on the 20th.
Is that the same march?
No, this is a different march.
Well, could you give us some details?
Yeah, it's going to be at 12:30 in Franklin Square is where it's meeting, and the route of that march is unannounced. We are also going to have a mass outreach day on Monday the 17th, which is everyone's going to gather. We put this call out publicly, so for people to gather and kind of break up into groups, go throughout the city on the metros, on the buses, different neighborhoods. We have a collection of leaflets and literature that we've compiled and written, and also asking people to bring their own, basically just to go out and to talk to people throughout the city about what's happening in the inauguration, about the issues, why we're protesting, and the issues they might be struggling with, kind of create a dialogue and kind of attempt to build alliances and networks within our communities around here.
Well, I think because the word anarchist is in your group title,
Right.
at least I have some greater interest to know why your route is not announced and what you plan to do, what form this march is going to take.
Right. Well, for one thing, our route is not decided yet. It's going to have kind of depend on a lot of different variables. So that's pretty much why it is unannounced at this point. It's going to be an energetic and vibrant march. There's going to be puppets and banners, hopefully, unless they get taken away by the police. There's going to be music and drums and, singing and chanting and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so basically that for the march. And then, did you want to hear about the other events as well again? Or?
I'm most curious about what you're going to do on the day of the inauguration.
Okay, so, yeah, that's the plan. Yeah.
Next question. Sir.
It's Andy Sullivan with Reuters. Now, Ms. Kay has said her group is opposed to all forms of government, but the rest of you presumably subscribe to the democratic system that we have in place here. And Bush won on November 2nd. Are y'all being sore losers here?
If I may take a crack at that myself, and then I'll turn it over perhaps to Shahza. First, just for the record, my name is Shahid. Not that I care terribly, that's fine. Second, with respect to the election was hardly a contest between visions of a progressive America versus Bush's America. The election was, to many observers, conceded from the outset when John Kerry was declared the Democratic nominee. John Kerry conceded an election before the votes were all counted. All the votes have yet to be counted in Ohio. No one has any idea how many votes were suppressed in Ohio. No one can determine it. It remains a completely unknown quantity. Moreover, there's been no rigorous effort by the administration to defend the methodology of the election. It is not the responsibility of a people to prove rigorously that an election was stolen or rigged. It is the obligation of a government to prove it was not. That is what the consent of the governed requires. That is the distinction between democracy and dictatorships. I'll leave it at that. Shahza, would you like to have a word?
Sore losers, that's two very interesting words, because African Americans in this country have pretty much been the losers all along. And today, in many instances, we're worse off now than when we came out of slavery. No, we're not being sore losers. In fact, we're shooting for victory, and we're trying to hold on to what our forefathers during the civil rights era, during that time period, what they marched for, what they put their lives on the line for. As you know, back then, when you did nonviolent acts, you wasn't guaranteed to live to the next day. If you were arrested, it wasn't a kind arrest. You were arrested and you were subject to being let loose in a field and shot. So no, we're not being sore losers. We're trying to be the victors here, but we're trying to be the victors with all united oppressed people. Thank you.
Sarah.
To address the question, if we are sore losers, I would say most definitely that all of the people with Turn Your Back on Bush, I know we do not feel at all that we are sore losers, that in fact we are the ones that are losing our jobs. I am organizing in eastern Pennsylvania, and right now I'm working with somebody who has lost his job because it's been outsourced. There's an organizer in Georgia who has lost her brother in the Iraq War. There are literally thousands of individuals across the country that are losing due to the policies that are made and the decisions that are made by this administration. There's an environmentalist activist that is working with us in Utah who also, he's concerned about the fact that we're losing our natural resources, that we're losing in the fight to preserve the environment that we live in. So while some may identify us as sore losers, what we feel is more important is the fact that we need to realize that the country is losing. We're losing in the economy, we're losing environment, we're losing lives in Iraq, and we're losing our power as civil rights that we should all have access to, and that we are all guaranteed as citizens of the country. And that's why we're here making this statement.
Other questions? Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Rhodes from the Cybercast News Service. I'm wondering about the extent to which the various groups are working together to make this effort possible, and also how you're getting the money to put all of it together.
Anybody in particular? Okay. I can answer at least some of that. Many of the groups have been collaborating through a spokes council, which has been meeting here in D.C. every week since, I would want to say, July of last year. And it's a space in which all the groups come together, share information, and collaborate and coordinate their efforts. With respect to money, you might be amazed at how much resistance could be mounted without spending a dime. This is a people's uprising. This isn't about organizations. This isn't about boards of directors. It's not about money. This is about speech and conviction and people. And that happens to be free, and we have lots of it. Would anybody else like to address that question? Jim will also answers to that.
My group, again, is the DC Anti-War Network. We're a network of groups, we're a network of individuals. And so we already are a collaborative effort of sorts. And we've joined the collaborative effort that Shah had mentioned in the DC Spokes Council, which is a beautiful site because you can see people from 30 or 40 different organizations sharing information and posting it over the internet at www.counter-inaugural.org. As far as the question of money, of course, it's not totally free. We've been getting some donations through our website at www.dawndc.net, and we've had the great backing of United for Peace and Justice, but they haven't given us a lot. Remember, I talked about big overarching groups. They're only giving us $1,500. That's our biggest funding source. We're doing this, like Shah had said, on virtually for free, virtually on the resources of the people, and we're willing to be transparent because it really is that cheap, you know, to do it when you've got people committed for a cause that is just.
Ma'am?
My name is Liz Farrell. I'm with the Chronicle of Higher Education. This question was for Sarah and Lila. I don't know if you're a college student or not, but I wanted to ask you both how much you can speak to this. Two questions is, what are the main college groups involved in the organizing of any protest things, and how many college students do you think will participate in it? Not numbers, but maybe proportion to the general number of protesters.
To respond to your question about colleges and college involvement in this, I've been working with a lot of colleges as they organize to participate in Turn Your Back on Bush, and I estimate that there's about 30 to 40 campuses, and on those campuses there is a campus captain, a leader who is organizing to get fundraising, organizing to get transportation, and organizing to get those students to DC to participate in the Turn Your Back on Bush action. As far as what kind of organizations and such they're affiliated with, there's a broad range. Some of them, from talking to a lot of the organizers, they mentioned that they're working with Campus Greens, they're working with Campus Democrats, they're working with political activist groups, environmentalist groups, women's groups, queer groups. I mean, all kinds of, they're really covering the spectrum of, and it's just a lot of individuals coming with different concerns, various concerns. There's some people that are just kind of, I know I'm organizing, I'm a student at Ursinus College, and there are some people that are just kind of curious and want to become more politically involved and don't really know how to do that and don't really know how to grab hold of the tools to get involved in politics. And this is a way for them to use, to express their voice, a way to become active in politics and make their voices heard, that they're concerned about the country.
I mean, pretty much I think she covered it, but I'm not currently a college student, but I am just on leave, so I have contacts and have been in communication with a lot of college students throughout the country, and I think that probably in terms of numbers what she said is fairly accurate. I know that a lot of them are already in groups and organizations that are organizing around this or preparing to come down and planning their own actions or things to bring to it, as well as probably forming coalitions of students specifically around this event that will be coming down in busloads for the 20th.
If I may offer one additional response, there isn't a particular action that is themed specifically for students, the J20 walkout, and that's basically a call to high school students and college students around the country to walk out of school that day. And I just want to tie this back to a theme we touched on earlier. The numbers that are represented and the people that are rejecting Bush expand far greater than any particular shot you might see of people in DC, right? This gets back to the money question as well. Money constrains the ability to travel. If you added all the students that are going to walk out of their classes at universities around the country, all the people that will be resisting in other cities, in other countries, we're talking about literally millions of people.
Universities and high schools.
That's right. I believe there's a website for it, and I could get it to you. I just don't know. It has a confusing URL, and I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head. Sir.
Brian Perchia with VOA. Sarah, is part of the reason why you're not identifying yourself, is it because your group is afraid that you won't be allowed onto the parade route if you are identified? And if that's the case, how far is civil disobedience going to go? You said die-ins. Are there plans for anything else?
I can address the question about us not identifying ourselves. Partially why we're not coming with placards, signs, buttons, etc. is because it's part of the philosophy of what we're doing, that we are gathering as citizens and we're practicing the rights that we have as citizens. It does happen to be an advantage for security in that we can more likely gain access and have no problems getting in because we look like anybody else coming in to watch Bush and there, during the inauguration. But as far as that, we do view it as an advantage with security, but more importantly, we view it as something, it's part of the ideas and the philosophy behind Turn Your Back on Bush, that we're just normal, everyday people who are gathering and showing that we feel that Bush has turned our back on us, so we're going to turn your back on you.
And the civil disobedience question. Is there anything else planned besides the die-ins?
Perhaps for the civil disobedience, I'll direct the question to Jim, and I would also set out there, because much of the organizing is decentralized, there is a great deal about which no one knows necessarily, so I'll leave it at that. Jim, would you like to address the question about civil disobedience?
Sure. All that my group is called for is the die-in, and that's all I can speak to.
If I may just circle back to a prior question, someone had asked about the walkout, and I do have a website for you. It's www.j20walkout.tsx, telephone, Simon, x-ray.org. Sir?
As a follow-up to this question about turn your back on Bush, as much as the National Park Service controls the parade route, and much of the parade route is lined with bleachers, and the bleachers are being sold, and I may be wrong on this, but do you not have to have some credential or some proof that you belong in those bleachers? So how much direct exposure to the actual parade will members of your group be able to gain?
That is something, again, I mean, it's a shame that we have to deal with that as something that what is most accessible in the celebration, what's supposed to be a public celebration of democracy, is actually tickets that are bought and sold. So those that have the most easily and guaranteed access to a public celebration that's in our Constitution to celebrate the president, the reserved spots are for those that can afford to pay access. There is general admission for standing space along the sidewalk. We feel that this really reflects on the presidency as well. You have to pay and you have to have money in order to be in the audience with the president and to ensure that you have his attention. So it's a sad situation, but it's something that reflects on the presidency and the policy and the way that he has conducted.
How do you get your people in so that they're turning their backs will be noticed by?
We will. I mean, there will be access. There is general free public admission to the space that is available on the sidewalks for standing. So there is standing space along the sidewalks. That is limited space, but it's there. And we plan to get there early so that we can have space on the sidewalk to do our action.
But you'll be behind the bleachers, right? I mean,
well, not necessarily. Yeah, because if along the parade route there's like space next to and in between, and also in front of bleachers. So there is space there. There is room on Pennsylvania Avenue.
In front of bleachers?
There is limited space on the parade route.
How many people are turning their backs?
It's hard to say. It's since it's such a national mobilization. I mean, we do have identified 41 state organizers all across the country coming there, but it's hard to say. All of those are assembling groups.
2,000.
Definitely over 1,000. Definitely over 1,000. But it's really hard to pin that down because the state organizers are still working and bringing groups. As many as up to 6 buses are coming from Wisconsin. So and the numbers continue to mount. So it's hard to pin down an exact number. But definitely a very large population and a very wide array of people from across the country are coming.
Further questions? Ma'am.
Hi, I'm Ashley Baird from CBS Early Show. I was wondering if any of you have permits to be in any particular locations.
There are certainly many permits. Jim, can you speak to that? Okay.
Speak to that. We do have permits for Malcolm X Meridian Hill Park, and also for McPherson Square, and for our march route. We also know of groups that have permits at DuPont Circle that will be feeding into our march as well. I know this isn't your direct question, but I do want to mention one other event, or one other thing that you should keep in mind. January 20th is one day, but there's actually events going on throughout the week and even the day after. There's a great event on January 21st at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ, which is sort of similar to the effort you're seeing here. It's bringing together a wide array inside the peace and social justice movement to speak, and it will be hosted by Dreamcatcher Films and Plymouth Congregational Church, and it will feature speakers from United for Peace and Justice, Answer, Code Pink, the wide array of the movement, and I think it's an exciting event as well. 7 p.m. on the 21st.
And we'll take one more question. In the back, sir.
Yeah. Rafe Bartholomew of the Waterbury, Connecticut Republican American, not party, but Lila, I'm a little curious about the puppets. I don't know if you can give us some sort of feeling of what they're going to be like. Are they marionettes? Are they big effigy puppets of Bush and Cheney? Are they planned yet? Are they anarchist puppets of some type?
I'll take one crack and then pass it over. Some of the puppets we're talking about are paper-mache constructions that are, say 15 feet tall and have movable arms and have signs on them. So we had one out in the street on January 6th that said, "Restore democracy, count every vote." That's one example of what we're talking about. If you have more thoughts.
Yeah, most of the puppets are very large, paper-mache, cardboard, pieces of wood, tin cans, all sorts of things, painted cloth. But yeah, pretty big so that it can be seen from a distance and throughout a crowd of people, I guess. We've been working on one puppet that is a spider puppet, and the symbolism of it being sort of in two ways, talking about power. One being that trying to show that what we're talking about is this sort of very centralized power that we're fighting against and the system at large, and that the legs representing all of the things that come from that, talking about poverty, war, exploitation, etc. And then on the other end, talking about the way in which other people here have mentioned, the way in which we are trying to organize and take sort of a step toward, not only in our group, but in the rest of these groups, and in, I guess, if you could say, a larger movement, talking about different groups and different people using all sorts of tactics and coming from all different places of organizing all sorts of around all sorts of issues, using all of those to come together and create a larger alternative and to create a larger body of resistance. So.
Before we close this afternoon, I just want to invite any interested representatives of the press to do follow-up interviews with any of our speakers. We also have representatives from Billionaires for Bush here present, if anyone would like to speak to them. And thank you very much for attending. See you at the counter-inaugural.
I'll give you my number.
At the RNC.
At the RNC, yeah. Michelle knows that.